welcome to this session. It's the first session. I think they're all starting now, so very honored to be here. I'm Sandra, and it's my pleasure to talk to you about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. We are going to talk about monetization and user acquisition. We've split this session in a way that there's going to be 20 minutes of me talking about insights, best practices, data. And then I'm going to invite my friend Ben on stage from Noodlecake Studios. And we're going to do a bit of a Q&A session or a fireside chat, whatever you want to call it, and see how some of those things that I'm going to talk about apply, for a real studio. And we're going to talk about more than that. So let's get started by, there's still some people filling in. Just kind of let them settle down. Hi. Okay, so let's get started with how the mobile gaming landscape looks today. One of the things that was mentioned by Matt in the keynote is that there's, I think, 3.3 billion players, so many of them on mobile, right? So today there are more mobile players than ever before. And so the question for game developers is not just how do I build a great game, but also can I make this into a commercial success? And many of you have poured your passion into making great games, because that's what we're all here for. But I talked to a lot of indie developers, smaller studios, and I feel that it's always a little bit daunting for them to think about monetization strategies, IP, ads, whatever. Like user acquisition is even, the next level, I think. And so my goal for this presentation is to give you a framework and best practices, how to approach growth, how to think about it, and how to build a strategy around it. So in order to help you do that, we've designed a framework that we call the game growth loop. So the core components, it's very simple. We start from this side. We start monetizing, okay? We're going to talk about that. Then we move to the other side, which is increasing the reach of your game, right? So let's start with the first part, which is turning engagement into revenue, making your first dollar, basically. So this is where we are. And to help you get started, we think you should look into these 3 strategies. We're going to go over all of them, and we're going to start with probably the most important one, which is to segment your players, segment your audience, right? So not all players behave the same. Some of them are very casual, they drop in once in a while. Some of them are very engaged. Some of them spend, some of them don't. And so when you segment them across these 2 axes, you essentially get 4 segments, right? Casual players who rarely engage, to your most valuable, what we would call a whale, maybe, someone who really spends maybe a lot of money, comes in a lot, right? But regardless of where they fall within this, there is an opportunity to monetize, right, through different strategies. And this is how you should get started, and treating each of these segments as their own group. Beyond segmenting this way, it's also really important to adjust your strategy over the lifetime of the user, of the player in your game. And here's why. So this is a really interesting piece of data. Basically, what that tells us is by day 25 of users in your game, on average, 75% of your payers will have converted. Okay? Beyond that, you still have 25% that you're going to convert, and you need to find them, right, and convert them. But it means that your strategy needs to adjust as the player moves through your game. Let's break this down a little bit more and look at the different game stages. So the way that we think about it is there is early game, mid game, late game. You have a different goal in each of these stages. In the early game, it's about engagement, right? You want to make sure your player understands the core loop, gets engaged with it, and comes back. A few ideas to do this, and we're going to, double check those things later with Ben. You want to really nail your tutorial. Beyond that, I think also offering starter bundles with attractive prices to actually start converting, those 75% as early as you can is important. The second stage is the mid-game. That is the stage when it's about conversion, right? That's the money time, if you will. And the goal here is to, now the user or the player understands your core game loop, but you want to engage them deeper with your content, right? So the way to do this is offer them different boosters, time-limited events, super good to create sort of a FOMO effect almost. And then you enter into the late game, and that's when retention is really important. So you want them to come back again and again and again. And how to do that is, offer different bundles in your IP store, currency sales. That's maybe also where you can introduce ads, right? So that's kind of the progression through the game, different cycles. The next thing I want to show you is average IP conversion rates. Okay, so this shows you, let's focus on the blue side over there. The most successful games convert between 3 and 4% of their users to be payers, right? Now, that's not a lot, but they make a lot of money, these players, right? So we definitely want them. They are our most valuable audience. And by the way, as you move more into the less successful game area, it's less than that, right? So let's say the ceiling is somewhere around there. That means that we have 96% of audience who does not do in-app purchases, right? And they probably never will. So this is the next thing I want to talk about, because how do we monetize them? Well, ads are one way of doing it, right? And to go through this, I'm not going to go over the different formats and stuff. I'm assuming you all know this. But I want to share with you a little bit of data about why surfacing time is so important. And then we're going to go into also ad implementation. So this is data that shows you how players engage with ads in different placements in the game, okay? Now, this is a little bit depending on the genre that you're building in, right? The one that stands out is probably the one that, gut feeling would have told us that that's the most interesting one. 43% of players who get offered to, let's say, watch a rewarded video will do so if they are out of resources in that point in time. Very common sense, but the data definitely supports that as well. And then the other placements, again, a little bit depending on the genre, but they're all pretty much along the same lines of engagement. We also see a clear trend of how players engage with ads across the lifetime in the game, okay? So this is data that shows you early stage players compared with mid and late stage players. And you can see that players that are later in the game will engage with more ads in 24 hours. So this is what I'm measuring here, right? So the 2.5, 2.3 is how many ads did the player watch within 24 hours. So now that we spoke about segmentation and how to build this across, again, the lifetime of your game, I want to touch one more point, and that is how to make sure that the quality of the ads that are being shown in your game is actually good. How can you make sure it is? How do you have transparency? So we've developed a tool that's called Ad Quality. This is a tool that's designed to give you transparency over the different ads, over the creatives and campaigns of all the networks that you have integrated, and how they run in your game, right? Who runs? What's the metrics, right? Which ad maybe churns my users? Is there an ad that has bad content? All of these things. So the use cases, I'm going to focus on the top 3 ones, because I think those are the most important ones. User complaint resolution. if a user reaches out to you through the Play Store or whatever, says, I saw an ad, it wasn't good, adult content, whatever, you can find it. You can see what this specific user saw. You can make sure it doesn't show anymore. The second one, age-appropriate ad content, specifically if you cater to a younger audience, it's really important. And then churn management. Now, churn can happen from a bunch of reasons, right? But if a creative churns your users, you want to know that. And then on the other side, you want to know how much money does this specific creative actually make me? And then you can make a decision. Do I want to keep it? Do I want to not keep it? The tool is for free, regardless of the mediation you use. It's completely, you go ahead, you use it. It comes as a standalone SDK or bundled, whatever you prefer. And I think it's a really important one. So let's summarize our journey through the monetization side of the growth loop. We talked about segmentation. We talked about adjusting your strategy across the lifetime of the game. And we talked about every segment and how they have different strategies as well. So ads are different from IP, obviously. And then we talked about transparency and ad quality. So now we understand that part. Let's move to the other side, finding the right players. So that's where we are right now. And the first thing I want to do is I want to connect the monetization part and the user acquisition part. So there is a feature in Unity that we call user acquisition transfer. And what that does is it allows you to take monetization revenue that you've made from ads and put it into a user acquisition campaign. So you can very easily start running user acquisition and just reinvest that money into the UA side of things. So let's talk about the next stage here, which is investing your first dollar, right? And I think this is the piece where a lot of developers get overwhelmed because user acquisition is a lot, right? So we're going to try to break it down. When we think about it, we first want to set up our campaign, right? So how do we do that? We go through all of these stages, and we're going to talk about them. The first one is defining your goal, and that's maybe the most important one. So there is a lot of KPIs to track, right? User acquisition is, I think, more complicated than monetization. You just put in an SDK and monetization, you make sure it runs, it's optimized, but it's much easier, right? Today there's bidding. You don't need to do a lot of waterfall optimization anymore. So this piece on the UA side, well, you need to know a lot of this to really make it efficient for you. And the KPIs that you can measure, there's a lot, right? There's performance KPIs, engagement KPIs, there's monetization KPIs. The most important one is your ROAS KPI, right? So ROAS stands for return on ad spend. And the little D1, D3, D7, whatever, tells you at which point in time are you measuring return on ad spend, because it changes as the LTV curve changes, right? The most simple formula to think about this, and again, obvious, but still making sure you know, is that you want to make sure that you cost per install, CPI, you pay less for an install than that user makes you, right? By how much, by the way? That's going to be your margin. And it depends on the competitiveness of the other players who are also trying to promote their games, right? This is the most important piece, the setting up your goal. The next part is a little bit more technical, but still super important. So starting with MMP, right? MMP, mobile measurement platform. There's a bunch of companies out there. I think one of them dropped a really interesting release today. I don't know if you saw this. But basically what that is it's a single source of truth. It's a third party that measures all your user acquisition across all the channels that you run with. And why do you need that? Because you want to know independently which impression brought which install. Maybe also installs come in organically, right? Ideally they do. And how does it all perform, right? What is a good user? What is a less good user? So that's what an MMP allows you to do. The next part is the geos. How do you think about launching a campaign? So what we usually recommend is you start with a tier 2 geo. Why? Because it's less competitive, meaning less expensive, right? Because you're actually putting your money on the table here. You start from there, you test and iterate, and then you go to tier 1 geos because it's more expensive, so you want to have your campaign set up and optimized. The last part is the budget piece. Now, budget depends a little bit on the network that you're running with. Some networks have, minimum budgets that they need you to put in. Most of them don't. So I would recommend you start with a couple of hundreds of dollars a day, and then from there you have your goals defined, right? So you can measure the budget against the goal that you have, and then you know if it's actually a good investment for you or not. So this is my favorite part, creatives. You obviously need creatives to run campaigns, right? So we would recommend first of all, what's important for me to say is that a creative flow is not just a one-time thing that you do when you launch your campaign for the first time, because there is a thing called creative fatigue, right? After a while, players in the market, they get tired of your creatives that you have out there. Also, maybe you have new content that you have coming up, right? So you want to make sure you showcase that content. What we recommend you do is you set this up and then you refresh it, right? So come up with 5 to 6 different concepts, produce 3 to 4 creatives, mix and match them. You have a playable, a video, an end card, whatever. Find out what works best on which network, and then from there, you test and iterate. So now our campaign is live. What do we do next? This bit is about optimizing campaigns. And this by itself would probably be another half an hour, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. But essentially what you want to do is you want to analyze cohorted results. Why cohorted? Well, because let's say you're using a ROAS D7 optimizer product by a network. So the earliest day you can look at the data is D8, right? Because you want to know how did my campaign perform across the whole 7 days that I'm optimizing for. If it's good, you make adjustments. Maybe you increase your budget because you're hitting your goal. If you're not hitting your goal, maybe you need to think about it again, lower it for a while, make a new creative, whatever it is. And from there, you rinse and repeat. So to bring our discussion to a close on the user acquisition side, we talked about the budget source, right? We talked about how important it is to define KPIs, how to set up the parameters, MMP, geo, budget, and then how to optimize and adjust it. So, as you can see, we went through the whole thing, and I hope that this gave you a solid, concept, how to approach this, how to think about the strategy here. And next, I want to see how a real studio applies, some of these things and more, because we're going to talk about more. And please help me welcome Ben to the stage for a fireside chat. So I'm going to click. I think I'm going to click here, okay?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Great.
Great. Let me just drink some.
Great advice. I don't disagree with anything you said, although I might have a little bit different take on certain things.
Great. Cool. So Ben is the head of technology at Noodlecake Studios, a Canadian studio.
Yep.
You're around for many, many years, but maybe start by introducing yourself and tell us about yourself and Noodlecake.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Ben Schmidt. I am the head of technology at Noodlecake, like she said. And I've been working at the company for coming up on 12 years at this point. So I've been working there for a long time. I do have more of a technical background. I, in particular, started in computer science and started as a developer. But I have made a point of learning as much as I can about the business and getting involved in all aspects of our business and learning as much as I possibly can about the industry. And at this point, I have been involved in the launch of so many games I've lost track.
More than 20? How many?
More than 20,
Okay.
especially early days of Noodlecake. We launched games really often. Now we go more quantity or quality over quantity, I'd say. But back then we would launch games really often. So, and yeah, Noodlecake itself, we are a indie game studio and publisher. So we make some of our own games in-house as well as help other people from all over the world launch their games, which is really fun. And we started out in 2011, primarily as a mobile game studio, but we have since expanded into the PC and console markets. And we had a game come out just last week called Winterborough, which has been getting a lot of love. We're really excited about it. And we have another game coming out in 2 weeks called Saturn Slalom, which was made almost completely by me. And if I'm being honest, I don't expect it to be a really big commercial success because it was more of a labor of love, but I'd love to be proven wrong. So everybody go pre-order it.
Very nice. Yeah, he was working on this game this morning. We just talked about it, so yeah.
Trying to get it ready for launch.
Yes. Cool. So you have been, so there's like tons of games that you've launched, with Noodlecake. What are some of the most significant changes you've observed in the free-to-play mobile game space that maybe changed the way you're doing things over those 12 years that you're doing this?
Yeah.
It's very long.
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest change I've noticed is how much harder discoverability of your games is. So back in the early days, when I started working at Noodlecake, we could launch a game, and as long as the game was like decent quality, people would just find out about it and download it, and it would make money. But nowadays, you can launch a great game and have nobody find it. You're just competing against so many more games in the market, as well as old games that were massive hits and games that are continuing to add content every day. So it's just harder to get found. And so part of the thing that has happened is the storefronts have moved from more of an editorial kind of approach, where they would just promote the games that the team thought was cool, towards more of a metrics-driven approach, where it really matters now how well your game converts, because the stores want to make money. So your game needs to monetize well, your game needs to retain well. And then in particular on platforms like Google, the technical performance of your game is also pretty important. If your game crashes a lot or has a lot of ANRs and that kind of thing, you're not going to get promoted as much. So you have to be more careful with your game itself and more thoughtful about how you're going to keep people playing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess one other thing I should say, like you said earlier, that said, the market is bigger than it ever has been. And there's more ways to get the message out about your game than ever before. So that helps too.
Yeah. Cool. The next topic I want to touch is around designing your monetization, strategies. How do you do that? So, you've launched a lot of games. They have different ways to monetize, right? What would be the first steps that you would recommend someone to take to determine what's right for their genre?
Sure. So what I would say is I feel like a lot of times people see a bunch of monetization talks and they get really focused on implementing all of the different things, monetization ideas they possibly can right away, and they lose sight on the fact that the game is your core product. You need to make sure that your game can hook people and that people will want to play your game before you get too bogged down in the monetization, because if your game can't keep people engaged before there's monetization, it certainly isn't going to once you've added ads and that kind of thing. That said, it's a good idea to be thinking about your monetization from the start. Some companies go as far as to only choose game ideas that will work with a monetization model that they want to work with. But you don't have to do that. You can start building a fun game, and then once you have kind of the core game loop, start thinking about how that game is going to monetize. It's interesting to think about if there's good places for rewarded ads in the game, good stopping points, or if that will really disrupt the flow of your game or somehow make it feel not as good. And so that's something that you can keep in mind when deciding how to monetize your game. And yeah.
Is there anything that you would say about designing the in-app purchase monetization side, or how do they work together?
Sure. So with in-app purchases, I think you just have to see if your game is going to suit it. It really depends on the genre and the style of game you're going for. If you just really have to think about it as you're building the game. If there is a good way to put an in-app purchase in that isn't going to feel like it lessens the experience, but does give players a leg up, then that can be a great approach. But yeah, it's very game dependent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it depends on the genre. Okay. And it's in the same direction, but how do you balance great gameplay as you build it with, having to monetize also? Is there a balance? How do you strike that?
Yeah, so I think, again, this is very game dependent, but just you should be thinking about your monetization from the beginning and trying to find ways that it complements your game. I think one thing to remember is that just because one other game does a certain thing that has worked really well, a really successful game has done this particular monetization strategy, doesn't mean that it's going to work with your game. And in fact, I feel like I've seen games that were really fun and had a lot of potential where they added the monetization in and it kind of made the game fall flat. So you just have to be really, really thinking about, from the outset, about your monetization so that you can recognize as you're developing the game when might be a good place to put that in-app purchase or that rewarded ad, or what players might be interested in interacting with in your game.
Yeah. Cool. And is there some connection between in-app purchases and ad monetization? Like, do they, I don't know, does an ad cannibalize in a purchase? Does it maybe increase it? I don't know. Is there any connection that you've ever encountered?
So if you've, a lot of times there isn't a huge noticeable issue with having both ads and in-app purchases in your game, but there is a few caveats to that. So for one, if your rewarded ads give out too good of a reward compared to your in-app purchases, some people will not go buy your in-app purchase. You need to make sure that your in-app purchase is real juicy and that players can kind of do the mental math and say, okay, that's going to save me this many ad views or that kind of thing, or that your in-app purchases are exclusive and you can't get them other ways. Additionally, sorry.
Is there a follow-up to this one? Would you say adding ads from day one makes sense? Or would you say first, get them hooked, try to convert with in-app and then...
No, so we do have some best practices we follow with this kind of stuff. If you want to talk specifically about implementing your monetization strategy. So you want ads in your game from day one, but not to show the player from day one.
Yeah, of course.
So typically what we recommend, or what we do, and it's been reasonably successful, we've been around for a long time, is we try not to present players with much of the monetization early on at all. So you want to be pretty sure that players are hooked on your game and are enjoying it before you start presenting them with too many monetization tactics, because otherwise they might just feel like your game is a bit of a cash grab and leave. You want to make sure that they're having fun, and there's different ways you can try to measure this. Again, it's a little bit game dependent, but if you have a high score game, it might be they reach a certain score where they think that you think that they probably understand the game, or if you have a level-based game, they got through the whole tutorial and maybe they played a little bit, and at that point, you can start thinking about how to monetize that user. And so if you have in-app purchases, starter bundles are a really great idea. Having something that's really juicy and cheap and a really good value to get them just into the game can help a lot. Rewarded ads too, you can start showing to players and trying to figure out if they're going to be interested in those. And you should be keeping track, at least locally, of what the player is engaging with. And then after a while, if you've started to present them with in-app purchases and rewarded ads and they're just never engaging with it, that's when you should be considering forced interstitials. And you still need to be kind of careful about where you place these, because you usually still would rather the player keep playing your game. And every time that you show a forced interstitial in particular, players don't like them. It's a chance for them to leave your game forever. But if they're not, buying anything in your game, if they're not interacting with your rewarded ads regularly, then a lot of times you want to start showing them those forced interstitials.
Yeah. How much time you spend on nailing the tutorial?
The tutorial is so important. And I don't know if you want to get into analytics a bit, maybe, but you should be very careful about monitoring your tutorial and putting analytics in at every stage in your tutorial to see where players might be leaving your game. If there's any stage in your tutorial that just doesn't come across clear enough, or especially if it's harder than you might think as the game developer, players might just leave your game really early. So you need to make sure that your tutorial is really important, your first-time user experience is really important, and that your first impression that players have is really well polished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my last question in this section would be, can you share something that you've noticed that has significantly evolved in terms of advertising capabilities or maybe player engagement with ads over the year?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say ads have gotten just a lot more sophisticated, and there are upsides and downsides to that.
When you say sophisticated, you mean sophisticated or?
You can do a lot more with them, but they also are a lot. I'll explain. So back when I started, video ads were like brand new. Like a lot of times it was just, a little image that would pop up even. And so over the years, we've seen, a lot of new stuff come out, and some great things like playable ads are fantastic. They give you the ability for players to play your game immediately and figure out what's fun about it. And like even when I'm testing our games and I'm playing the ads, there's certain games where I saw the video and I'm like, I don't know. And then you play the playable and it's actually fun. You're like, oh, maybe I should go download this. So that's great. But the ads have also gotten a lot longer and a lot harder to get out of than they used to. So you have to be much more careful about how you're placing them in your game so that it doesn't really disrupt the gameplay experience and just turn people off. Because back when I started, you could always get out of an interstitial within like 5 or 10 seconds. You could always get out of a rewarded ad within 30 seconds. And sometimes it takes players a little bit longer, and it's just more disruptive than it used to be.
Right. Cool. The next thing I want to go to is launch strategies and, user acquisition, getting installs. In your latest titles, and you just launched one, 2 weeks ago, was it?
Last week.
Last week. What is your go-to-market planning process? How does the soft launch look? How does the actual launch look? Sure.
So I wasn't involved in the launch of Winterboro too much, and that's a whole different ballgame because that's like a PC game, PC console.
Right.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Super Flappy Golf, which is a game that I was super involved with. I got some Flappy Golf talk. You can't really see them, but that game, so it's out worldwide, but in many ways we still kind of consider it in soft launch. And so I'll tell you a bit about the story of how that game has started and where we're going. We did have an actual soft launch for the game where we launched in a few countries, as well as allowed anybody who went to our website and signed up for the beta to get involved. And we kind of used that opportunity to really make sure the core mechanics of our game were working really well and making sure that players actually enjoyed the experience, right? And from there, we ended up launching it worldwide. Before we had some of the monetization and multiplayer hooks that we actually really wanted to get into the game that we thought would make it a full rounded experience. But part of the reason we did that was to get more players that we could get data from. So we made sure our analytics were really well set up. And that new influx of players allowed us to figure out what was working and what wasn't as much. As well as start building a community on Discord and getting player input about what would make the game even better. And so since then, we have been continuing to add features, and we have now like a roadmap of where we want the game to be, at which point we're going to start doing more paid user acquisition and seeing how that goes and monitoring and optimizing and all the fun stuff that Sandra told everybody about. And we'll see how that goes. And if it goes really well, then I'm sure we'll be adding content to the game for years and years to come. And if it goes okay, then you know, maybe we won't put quite as many resources and start looking at the next thing. But that's where we're at.
So there isn't really a launch. It's kind of this process.
It really depends on the game. Yeah. I mean, this is our first-party title. We're a little bit more fast and loose with some of the best practices, maybe, than we would be with a published title, where we're going to try to follow things a little bit more by the book. But the circumstances matter, and the launch, especially on mobile, isn't as important as it used to be in the earlier days of the App Store. It used to be that you would launch a game and you'd have a huge influx of downloads, and then the game would die out really quickly. And now your long tail is a lot more important. And in our title, like Golf Blitz, for example, it was the most popular like 4 years or 5 years after launch. So your initial launch isn't necessarily as make or break as it used to be on the App Store.
What broke that for this game? Like what changed after 4 years?
I think it was just like persistence and us continuing to add features. I mean, when you're working on a game for that long, you just continue to add and add and add, and eventually the game is just good. If you can keep retaining users while continuing to gain a player base, then hopefully you're just gaining users quicker than they leave, and that's what happened. Yeah.
Right. So for any studio launching their first title today, you know, with limited resources, what would you tell them to prioritize in marketing to make it, you know, have a chance for success?
Sure. So when you say limited resources, I'm going to assume you mean money, because that's usually what people mean.
Yes.
And that usually means that you're going to have to put a little bit more time in. But so some of the things that I would focus on, there are some totally free things you can do to start. Make sure that you're posting lots and lots on social media. If you do it on your personal accounts, your friends might get annoyed with you. So make a company account or an account for your game, but don't be afraid to be posting really often. Every time that you post is a chance for a new person to find out about your game. And people tend to think that they're going to annoy people, but really it's rare that you're going to be posting too much. When you are making those social media posts, also don't be too worried about them being a little bit unpolished or a little bit janky. Sometimes just the silly memes that you put out end up getting way more traction than the thing that you spent 3 hours making. So don't be too afraid to just tell people about your game all the time. And you can also look for kind of niche communities, and Reddit is a really good place for this. There is a little bit of a fine line where certain communities can really smell that you're trying to market to them and they don't like it. But if you try to be genuine and show people hopefully something that they want, sometimes that can be really successful. Outside of that, pre-orders are really important. They can help a lot with your launch. If you have, like a Steam game, you want to get your page up as soon as you have something that looks kind of marketable and start getting wish lists. And on mobile, you can also do pre-orders. But the caveat is that on mobile, your pre-order window can only last a certain amount of time. And if you don't launch your game before your pre-order window is up, you'll lose all of the pre-orders that you got. So you don't want to put up your pre-order until you're pretty sure you're going to be able to hit that launch window.
That happened to you.
That has happened to us.
Yes.
But so yeah, make sure that that's going. What else? I mean, obviously, yeah. Then you can start looking into little campaigns and doing the stuff that Sandra well explained before. Also, I guess make sure you are looking for promotions from the app stores. On Google, it's a little bit trickier. They have a form somewhere, but you might need to know someone to get access to it. But on App Store Connect, right there, there's a section to request the App Store team to feature your game. So make sure you use that. Tell them about your game, why it's cool. In particular, talk about any Apple-specific features they might like, right? If you implemented some cool new thing that Apple has just released, or you support new hardware, they're going to be looking for games that showcase those new things that they made. And so make sure you're talking about that, and sometimes that can get you some love from the stores.
Nice. Okay, if you had to start a campaign today and you have, let's say, I don't know, $2,000 for the whole thing, where would you go? What would you do?
Okay, so with a smaller campaign, you're never going to have enough money to like move up the charts really or anything like that, right? So what I usually would recommend is that you use that money in particular to get good data about your game so that you can help improve your retention and just improve your game. And so with that money, I would usually start with a small campaign with Meta, with the Facebook Audience Network. They just are really good at finding that initial demographic, and you can expand to other providers after that. But I would start with a small campaign. Probably I'd even split that $2,000 up into a couple campaigns. And your goal really will be to try to improve your game via analytics, and to see then how much it costs to get those users, and to see where you can go with that. One thing I would say specifically about Audience Network, a pitfall, is make sure you're not optimizing for lowest cost install. You will get a lot more installs, and they will all be garbage.
Yes.
No one will keep playing your game. You won't get any usable data. It's not going to be very helpful. So just let it do its thing. It'll find you a niche, and then you can also kind of see what demographics have latched onto your campaign, and from there you can expand out.
Okay. Last question in the UA section. Was there ever a tipping point of a game that was already out, and then suddenly you made a change? There was suddenly, revenue went up, in a purchase revenue, ad revenue, whatever it is. And then you said, let's put more money in the UA side of things and increase.
We definitely have had that happen a few times. I don't know that I have really specific advice to give about it, but what I can say is it's really exciting when you see that happen for the first time, and you think, oh, let's just turn on the money machine. Every dollar I'm spending, I'm getting more back, and you should do that. You should, but all good things will come to an end as your campaign grows. These campaigns, they typically find the most engaged users fairly early on. So as you expand your campaign, you're going to start getting less people, and eventually it'll die out. But the upside is that once you've had that influx of users, a lot of times there will be a trickle of organic users that continue to come in even after the campaign's over. So sometimes there's nice extra side effects other than just seeing the value of the one player. Sometimes that also means you're going to be getting other players into your game as well.
Cool. Next thing I want to talk about is publishing, being a publisher, strategic partnerships. So, you said you also have a publishing arm. Is there a difference in how you approach, marketing or, monetizing, I guess, any game that you make in-house versus published?
So I think at Noodlecake, we honestly treat every game like it's our own. Every game is marketed very differently and monetized very differently. It really depends on the game, and we deal with a wide variety of stuff, and things change drastically depending on the platform and the monetization model. That said, I do think that we tend to follow things a little bit more by the book, follow the best practices with our published titles a little bit more closely, because there are other partners involved and we don't want to upset anybody by taking a really big risk unless that team also really wants to take that risk with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's a key benefit of having a good publisher beyond maybe just getting, the funding?
Yeah, so publishers can provide a bunch of things. Money is a big one, obviously, but experience is also really valuable. They can not necessarily make your game a success, but they can use their experience to tell you about all the ways that you might be about to fall into a trap. So they can set everything up for you. Their industry connections can be really valuable. Sometimes a publisher will have access to opportunities for your game that you would not have been able to get otherwise. But I think the most valuable thing that a publisher can give you is time, honestly. So a good publisher will be able to take care of the things, like as an indie studio or a small studio or a single person, it takes forever to do all aspects of making a game. And if you have to get really good at marketing and you have to get really good at everything, it just takes forever. So a good publisher will take over the stuff that you're not as good at and help you focus on making the best game you possibly can.
Yeah. So we already touched a little bit, but the data-driven decisions and analytics would be something interesting, I think, as well. So for indie developers, small studios, what are the most common pitfalls when you want to set up your analytics system? And we've heard already how important it is. And then what's your advice for setting up something that's lean, actionable, and actually helps you to look at all these KPIs that you want to look at?
Sure. So some common pitfalls that I see, especially with indie studios, is you go from having no analytics to actually too many analytics. You can hear about big companies trying to get as much data as they possibly can, but as a small studio, you probably don't have a full-time data analyst on hand. So you need to be really thoughtful about thinking in advance what kind of questions you want your analytics to answer, and what metrics you want to follow, I guess, and then setting up your analytics accordingly, and setting up your A/B tests accordingly so that you can test different things out. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
What's your advice on setting that up as a lean but actionable thing that allows you to?
Yeah. Sorry. And I have one other common pitfall, which is people not testing their analytics properly. As a developer, I know it's really, really annoying to test analytics. You put all these events in, you need to go to 100 different places in your app, you need to get them to fire, then you need to go to the dashboard, you need to make sure all the data is correct. But it's even worse to spend a bunch of money on a campaign and realize that you can't answer some of the questions that you wanted to answer.
That happened to you before? No.
It's happened before. Not every question that but there's things that have happened. So it happens. It does, because testing it is boring. Okay, and then in terms of actually setting up an analytics plan, the two main things to focus on typically are your first-time user experience and your progression, so your retention essentially, and then your monetization. So for your retention stuff, you want to pay really, really close attention to your tutorial, have analytic events at every stage of the way, and so that you can see where people might be dropping off. Same goes with early levels. If you have like a level system in your game, have analytic events after each one. Maybe you'll be able to identify that one of your early levels is too hard and lots of people are leaving the game, and you can smooth that experience out. From there, I guess if you have certain retention hooks, like a daily bonus or something, having analytics in there to make sure people are engaging with it and that the rewards are good enough is valuable. But from there, it gets a little bit more game dependent. And then in terms of monetization, it's really important to have analytic events with all of your rewarded ads. That tells you what people are actually interested in engaging with. And it's a great idea to have to use A/B tests as well to see like, okay, if I give them twice the reward here, are they more likely to click on it? And then you still have to think about, are you giving them too much of a reward that now they're not going to buy the in-app purchase? But make sure that you're analyzing all of your rewarded ads. Also, you want to make sure, obviously, that you're analyzing what people are spending money on, so that you can tweak the numbers if it's not going as you'd like, or add more of a type of product that people are really engaging with. And you also should have analytic events around your forced ads. This ends up typically going back more to the retention side of things, though, where you're looking to see if a forced interstitial is hurting your retention and forcing people to, or getting people to leave the game.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. We're gonna have like probably 7 or so minutes for questions for you guys. So if you have anything, think about it. I have one more topic I want to touch, and that is more, around long-term maintaining, and then some industry insights that I want to ask you one last question. But first, you have a lot of games out there on the stores, right? Huge portfolio. What are some maybe hidden costs of maintaining them, that maybe people overlook or don't think about?
Sure. So I think a common misconception is that if you're not adding new content to your game, that you don't have to be updating it regularly. And that's just not true, especially on the mobile marketplaces, and double especially on Google. So on Google Play, they do require you to target the latest SDK at least once every 2 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it sneaks up on you, especially when you have a bunch of games. And then additionally, there will be security vulnerabilities that come up. Sometimes that's ad networks or whatever. There is new billing requirements where you need to use their latest billing library. Right now, there's a 16 kilobyte page size thing, or there was 64-bit stuff back in the day. You're going to be having to update your game regularly, and there's not really any way around it, unfortunately. But the extra hidden cost of this is a lot of times, in order to support these new things, you need to update Unity to a newer version. And lately, that's been pretty hassle-free in terms of all the Unity components, but a lot of times your third-party plugins and stuff will break, or something will become obsolete, and then you often end up in a bit of an update cycle where you have to update not just Unity, but all of your ad networks and all of this other stuff. And it can just take a lot longer than people expect. And then also, you should be regularly updating your game if it's ad supported. Ideally, you want to update your ad networks fairly regularly, because they'll make you more money if you do.
Yeah. Okay, so what, in your opinion, is one of the biggest misconceptions that developers have about user acquisition, monetization, strategies?
So I think one common misconception people have about monetization is that there's a one-size-fits-all solution for it. I think a lot of times people will go look at a really successful game and just decide that they're going to use the same monetization model in their game. And that really doesn't work. You do have to really think about it on a game-by-game basis and figure out what complements your game, and not just add things because you've seen it in other successful titles.
User acquisition, anything there?
User acquisition. I think a common misconception is that you need like a really big budget to do it. You can be pretty successful by using your time and going with all the free routes, and then using a small budget to start. You don't need to have $50,000 in advertising money to do this. You're not necessarily looking to get to the top of the charts. You just need to get a stable flow of players coming in. And then, I talked earlier about how the app stores have moved towards a little bit more of a metric-driven model. And if your game is good and you do a little bit of user acquisition, sometimes that can kind of kickstart those recommendation algorithms and start getting you more organic users as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
My last question. What is something related to game growth that you believe isn't talked about enough in the industry, or something that you think should be more prominent?
So I think one thing related to game growth specifically that isn't talked about enough is how much the game itself matters. I think as much as it's useful to know all of the best practices and stuff, sometimes if your game just doesn't have a great market fit, there's no amount of marketing that is going to get it where it needs to be. And so if your game is in too niche of a category, or is in a genre that is way too oversaturated, or even if your game could be legitimately amazing, but it takes a while to understand why the game is so cool, and it's really hard to convey that in your marketing, sometimes it just is going to be really hard to make that game a success. So it's good to be thinking about how you're going to market your game and like the marketplace that you're going to launch into before you invest a ton of time into your game if you're trying to make something that's going to be commercially successful.
Right.